It was a Tuesday morning in New York City, and the studio lights on the set of The View glared brighter than usual. The cameras had already begun to roll, the studio audience buzzing with anticipation. But behind the scenes, there was an energy in the air that felt different, almost electric, almost uneasy. The guest that morning was Angelina Jolie, an actress and humanitarian whose reputation often precedes her. She had agreed to come on the show for what was advertised as a lighthearted conversation about her latest projects, her work with refugees, and a bit of insight into her life as a mother. On paper, it should have been a standard daytime television interview. But as Angelina settled into her chair under the hot studio lights, it became clear that something was off. Across the table sat Joy Behar, a longtime co-host known for her sharp wit, political commentary, and fiery confrontations. Joy had sparred with celebrities and politicians before, but this time, the tension in her body language suggested something more personal. She adjusted her papers repeatedly, glanced at the cameras, then looked back at Angelina with a sharpness in her eyes. The segment began innocently enough. Whoopi Goldberg, serving as moderator, welcomed Angelina warmly. The audience erupted in applause, many on their feet, excited to see her in person. Angelina smiled, gracious as ever, her calm demeanor almost disarming. She spoke about her recent humanitarian trip, sharing anecdotes that drew applause and murmurs of admiration from the crowd. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then, without warning, the tone shifted. Joy leaned forward in her chair, interrupting mid-sentence. Her voice carried an edge that sliced through the otherwise warm atmosphere. "Angelina," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism, "don't you think a lot of what you do is more for show than for substance? I mean, people could argue you use these humanitarian trips as a way to polish your image rather than make real change." The studio fell silent. Even the hum of the stage equipment seemed to fade away. The audience looked stunned, unsure of how to react. Some gasped audibly. Others leaned forward, sensing drama. Angelina blinked, clearly taken aback, but she didn't flinch. Her expression remained steady, her posture composed. She waited a beat before responding, her voice calm but firm. "I don't do this work for image," she replied softly, almost measured. "I've been working with displaced people for over 20 years. It's not glamorous work. It's painful, but it matters. And if talking about it here encourages even one person to pay attention, then it's worth it." The audience erupted into applause, clapping louder than before. But Joy wasn't finished. She waved her hand dismissively, her frustration bubbling closer to the surface. "Oh, come on.
People don't buy it.
You're still Hollywood. You're still playing a role. Humanitarian, mother, activist, it's all branding. Isn't it?" The words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably, looking like she wanted to intervene, but the momentum had already taken hold. Angelina tilted her head slightly, her calmness almost unsettling given the provocation. "If that's how you see it," she said, "I can't change your perspective. But I know why I do what I do, and the people I've met in camps around the world, they don't see it as branding. They see it as someone showing up." More applause. Some in the audience shouted encouragement. Joy's expression hardened. Her voice grew louder, more desperate. "But isn't it convenient that every time there's a premiere or a new project, suddenly you're in a refugee camp? Doesn't that line up a little too neatly? People aren't stupid, Angelina." Angelina exhaled slowly, clasping her hands in her lap. "I don't schedule wars or crises around my movie releases, Joy. That's not how the world works." The audience roared with laughter and cheers. Even some of Joy's fellow co-hosts chuckled nervously. Joy's face flushed red, but instead of retreating, she doubled down. Her words began to spill faster, less measured. "You think you're some kind of saint, but really you're just another Hollywood elitist pretending to care. The truth is, you're no better than anyone else sitting at this table. You're not special." The studio gasped. Some audience members booed. One or two even shouted for Joy to calm down. The atmosphere had shifted from tense to explosive. The show had gone off script, and there was no reeling it back. Angelina, to her credit, remained remarkably composed. She turned slightly toward Joy, her voice steady but edged with quiet disappointment. "I've never claimed to be better than anyone else. I'm here to talk about real people in need, and if this conversation has to turn into an attack on me instead of focusing on them, then that's unfortunate. But I won't apologize for caring." The words cut through the chaos like a blade. The audience erupted once again, this time in thunderous applause. Joy, however, looked cornered. Her body tensed, her face twisted into frustration, and for the first time, her voice cracked under the strain. "This is ridiculous. You're manipulating everyone with your saint act," she shouted, her hands waving wildly in the air. Producers scrambled behind the cameras, whispering frantically into headsets. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to de-escalate. All right, let's take a breath here, ladies. We don't need to go down this road." But it was too late. Joy pushed back her chair slightly, her microphone catching the sound of it scraping against the floor. Her voice rose another octave, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "No, I won't sit here and let her fool everyone. I won't be part of this charade." The crowd booed loudly now. The balance of sympathy fully shifted. Angelina sat still, her silence more powerful than any words she could have spoken. And then chaos. The cameras kept rolling as security quietly approached the stage. Joy's co-hosts looked horrified. The audience didn't know whether to cheer, boo, or fall into stunned silence. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just another daytime spat. This was a meltdown, raw, unfiltered, and unlike anything the show had ever seen. Now, let me ask you, if you were sitting in that studio audience, what would you have done? Would you have cheered Angelina's composure? Or would you have sided with Joy, convinced she was exposing a hidden truth? Because in that moment, under the glare of studio lights, it didn't just feel like television. It felt like history. The studio was on edge. You could feel it through the screen, through the shifting of bodies in the audience, through the whispers of crew members scrambling behind the cameras. Something had been unleashed, and there was no way to put it back in the box. Joy Behar wasn't finished. Not even close. She leaned forward, her voice lower now, almost daring. "Let's be honest, Angelina. This humanitarian image you've built? It's nothing more than a cover. You swoop into countries, you adopt kids, you pose for cameras, and suddenly you're the savior. But isn't it just another version of colonialism? Another wealthy white woman collecting stories and children from the developing world." The words struck like lightning. The crowd gasped in unison. Even Whoopi Goldberg's eyes widened, her mouth opening in disbelief. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, unsure whether to intervene. And then, silence. A silence so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Angelina blinked, her composure cracking for the very first time. She didn't look angry, not yet. Instead, she looked hurt. But she caught herself quickly, straightening her posture, folding her hands calmly in her lap. Her voice was quiet, steady, but tinged with something sharper. "Joy," she said, "I welcome difficult conversations. I welcome debate about humanitarian work, because nothing is simple in this world. But what you just said, what you just implied, is not only offensive to me. It's offensive to my children. To suggest that they were adopted as part of some strategy or performance is deeply wrong. They're my family, my children, and they're loved." The audience erupted in applause, some even standing to cheer. It was a rare moment on live television, raw, emotional, and undeniably real. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. Her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. She leaned forward again, pressing her attack. "Come on, Angelina. Everyone knows the timing. You were painted as the other woman who broke up America's sweethearts, Brad and Jennifer. Your career was under fire. And then, suddenly, Saint Angelina appears. The humanitarian. The rescuer. Convenient, isn't it?" The gasp from the crowd was almost physical. You could feel the shift in the air, like the moment just before a storm hits. Even the other co-hosts looked horrified. Sunny Hostin covered her mouth with her hand. Sarah Haynes shook her head in disbelief. Whoopi put her hands flat on the table, her voice tense as she tried to cut in. Joy, that's enough. But Joy ignored her. This whole act, she continued, gesturing toward Angelina, is just PR. It's branding. You're not fooling me. And you're not fooling anyone else. For the first time, Angelina's jaw tightened. Her calm exterior wavered, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an edge of steel. Joy, she said evenly, you're entitled to your opinion. But you are not entitled to rewrite my life. You are not entitled to insult my children, or to reduce years of work in war zones and refugee camps to a photo op. I've put my life at risk to bring attention to crises most people would rather ignore. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why. The audience exploded, cheers, applause, even shouts of support. People weren't just watching anymore. They were reacting, choosing sides, and the majority were firmly with Angelina. Joy's face flushed crimson. She wasn't winning, and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she escalated further. Oh, how noble, she sneered. But let's be real. You love the cameras. You love the headlines. And you love the attention that comes with being the good one. You can act like you're above it all, but this is just ego. Pure ego. The words were venomous, and the room reacted instantly. The audience booed, some shaking their heads. Even Whoopi now looked visibly angry, her patience gone. But Angelina, remarkably, didn't rise to the bait. She smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that comes when someone realizes their opponent has just revealed too much. You think this is about ego? She asked softly. Do you think standing in the middle of a refugee camp, surrounded by families who have lost everything, is glamorous? Do you think visiting hospitals filled with wounded children is fun? There are no red carpets there. No photographers. No applause. Just human suffering. And if I can bring even a fraction of attention to their pain, then I will continue to do it, regardless of what you think of me. The studio roared. People were on their feet now, clapping, cheering, shouting words of encouragement. Joy tried to interject, but the noise drowned her out. The tide had turned, and everyone could feel it. Still, Joy refused to quit. Her voice rose above the crowd, desperate now, almost shrill. You can play saint all you want, but you can't erase the past. You destroyed a marriage. You broke up a family. And no amount of refugees or adoptions can change that. The audience gasped louder than ever. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was vicious, personal, and cruel. Even Joy's co-hosts looked appalled. Sarah Haynes shook her head, muttering, "Unbelievable," under her breath. Sunny Hostin leaned back in her chair, visibly distancing herself. Angelina's face hardened. She stood up slowly, deliberately. The room went silent, waiting for her response. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. "Joy," she said, "I came here to talk about important work, about issues that matter, about people who need help. Instead, I've been ambushed with gossip, with accusations, with tabloid narratives dressed up as journalism. You've attacked my work, my character, and now my family. And I will not tolerate it." The studio was dead silent. Even the cameras seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling. Joy smirked, mistaking Angelina's composure for weakness. "What's the matter? Can't handle tough questions." Angelina leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "A tough question is about the complexities of international adoption. A tough question is about the challenges of balancing humanitarian work with family life. What you've done here is not tough journalism. It's bullying." The audience erupted again, louder than ever. People were shouting, clapping, even chanting her name. Joy's face faltered, her smirk slipping as she realized the room was no longer on her side. And then, for the first time, her voice cracked. "I'm not a bully. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Angelina tilted her head, her gaze steady.
"No, Joy.
You're saying what you're thinking. And in doing so, you've shown everyone here exactly who you are." The applause was deafening. Now pause for a moment and think about this. Imagine being in that studio. Imagine the tension, the heat of the lights, the roar of the crowd. Imagine watching one of Hollywood's most respected figures calmly dismantle an attack in real time, while her opponent unraveled in front of millions. Would you have sided with Angelina's composure, or with Joy's defiance? Because in that moment, a line had been drawn, and what happened next would push everything past the point of no return. The studio was no longer a studio. It was an arena. The audience wasn't just watching, they were participating. Every word, every glance, every pause between sentences felt electric. People were leaning forward in their seats, some clutching their chests, others whispering frantically. It was no longer a daytime talk show. It was live theater, messy, raw, and dangerous. And at the center of it stood two women, Angelina Jolie, calm but firm, and Joy Behar, visibly unraveling. Joy's cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. She had crossed a line, several lines in fact, and everyone knew it. But instead of stopping, instead of pulling back, she doubled down. "Bullying," she repeated, her voice high and mocking. "Oh, please. Don't flatter yourself. If you can't handle criticism, maybe you should stick to acting. Humanitarian work clearly isn't your strong suit." The words hung in the air like poison. The crowd reacted instantly, boos echoing through the studio, shouts of "sit down" and "enough" ringing out. Whoopi Goldberg's patience finally snapped. She slapped the table, her voice cutting through the noise.
"Joy.
That's it. You've crossed the line." But Joy didn't even look at her co-host. Her eyes were locked on Angelina, wild, determined, almost desperate. She wasn't just trying to win an argument anymore. She was trying to destroy. And then, something happened that no one expected. Angelina laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, or even a mocking one. It was soft, almost disbelieving. She shook her head slightly, as if to say, "This is what it's come to?" And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had already won. "Joy," she said gently, "I think everyone here can see that this isn't about me anymore. This is about you. About your need to tear others down. About your anger. And maybe about your fear." The audience went silent. It was a masterstroke, not anger, not defensiveness, but empathy. And it landed like a punch. Joy's face twisted, her voice rising almost to a shout. "Don't you psychoanalyze me. Don't you sit there on your pedestal and act like you know me. You're a fraud, Angelina. A fraud." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just heated television anymore, it was a meltdown. Joy's voice cracked, her words slurring together with rage. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The cameras caught everything, the trembling hands, the darting eyes, the sheer fury etched across her face. The producers were panicking now. You could see crew members signaling frantically from the sidelines, cutting to wide shots, trying to contain the chaos. But it was too late. The moment had spiraled completely out of control. Angelina, still seated, didn't flinch. She looked up at Joy with an almost serene expression, as though she were watching a storm burn itself out. Her calmness only fueled the contrast, the unraveling host against the unshaken guest. The other co-hosts tried to intervene. Sarah Haynes reached out a hand, pleading, "Joy, sit down. Please. This isn't okay." Sunny Hostin leaned in, her voice firm but calm. "Joy, stop. You're making it worse." But Joy ignored them, her voice now rising above the chaos. "You're not a hero. You're not a saint. You're a manipulative, home-wrecking liar, and everyone needs to stop pretending otherwise." The crowd erupted, some booing loudly, others shouting, "Get her off." It was pandemonium. That's when the executive producers stepped onto the set. It almost never happens, the invisible hand of the show suddenly made visible. His face was pale, his eyes darting between the cameras and the two women at the table. He spoke quickly into his headset, then moved toward Joy, placing a hand on her arm. "Joy, you need to step back. Now." But Joy yanked her arm away, her voice cracking with rage. "Don't touch me. I'm not finished." The cameras caught everything, the desperation, the chaos, the unraveling of a woman live on national television. Security had quietly entered the studio, standing just off camera, waiting for the signal. And through it all, Angelina remained seated, composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She glanced briefly at the audience, then back at Joy, and when she spoke again, her words were measured, deliberate. "I think," she said softly, "that this is no longer about me or about humanitarian work. This is about a breakdown. And I won't be part of exploiting it." It was a stunning line, and it shifted the entire atmosphere in the room. The audience, once rowdy, fell into an uneasy hush. People were realizing they weren't just watching drama, they were witnessing something tragic, something uncomfortable. Joy, however, didn't stop. She pointed at Angelina, her hand shaking. "You think you're better than me? You think you're better than everyone? You're nothing. Nothing." Her voice cracked mid-sentence, and for the first time, there was no applause, no boos, just silence. The breakdown was complete. The producer finally gave the signal. Two members of security stepped forward quickly but carefully, moving to Joy's side. She tried to resist at first, pulling back, her words dissolving into incoherent shouts. But within seconds, they guided her off the stage, her microphone still live, catching fragments of angry muttering as she disappeared behind the curtain. The studio sat in stunned silence. The cameras lingered awkwardly on the table, where Angelina and the remaining hosts sat frozen. Whoopi Goldberg rubbed her forehead, visibly shaken. Sarah and Sunny exchanged glances, their faces pale, and Angelina, still composed, still calm, took a deep breath. She looked directly into the camera, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm sorry to the viewers at home. This was supposed to be a conversation about important issues. I hope, moving forward, we can focus on what really matters." The audience erupted into applause, not the chaotic kind from earlier, but genuine, supportive, almost protective applause. It was clear who had come out of this disaster with dignity intact. The producer signaled for a commercial break. The cameras cut away. But the damage was already done. The moment would live forever, not as an interview, not as a segment, but as one of the most explosive meltdowns in live television history. And here's the thing. Think about it for a moment. You don't need to be a fan of Angelina Jolie to understand what happened here. You don't even need to like her movies. What you saw was bigger than celebrity gossip. It was about composure under fire. About the line between journalism and cruelty. About what happens when the pursuit of a gotcha moment pushes someone past their breaking point. And in that studio, under those lights, with millions watching, Joy Behar reached that breaking point. But as shocking as it all was, this wasn't the end of the story. No. What happened after the cameras stopped rolling would take this scandal to an entirely new level. And the fallout? It would ripple far beyond a single episode of a talk show. The commercial break ended, but the energy in the studio didn't recover. How could it? Something irreversible had just unfolded on live television, and no amount of scripted banter or upbeat segues could paper over it. When the show returned, Whoopi Goldberg's face told the story. She was still visibly rattled, her usual sharp wit replaced with a quiet, almost weary tone. "We're going to move on," she said firmly, her eyes darting toward the audience, then to the camera. "Because that's what live television requires. But let's be clear, we value respect here. Always." Angelina remained seated, poised, her posture unchanged. She gave a small, polite smile to the audience, acknowledging their support without a word. The rest of the segment limped forward, but everyone knew the episode was already etched into history. When the credits rolled and the cameras cut off, the studio exhaled collectively, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. But if Joy's outburst was explosive in the studio, the reaction outside was nuclear. Clips of the meltdown hit the internet within minutes. Audience members with smartphones uploaded shaky footage before the network even had a chance to release the official broadcast. Within an hour, hashtags were trending worldwide. Hashtag Angelina versus Joy. Hashtag The View Meltdown. Hashtag Team Angelina. By the end of the day, millions had seen it. Commentators, bloggers, late-night hosts, everyone weighed in. Some called it the most uncomfortable television moment since the infamous Tom Cruise couch-jumping incident. Others compared it to live political debates gone off the rails. But almost no one defended Joy. The headlines were brutal. Joy Behar explodes on live TV. Angelina Jolie keeps composure amid host's meltdown. Daytime disaster. The interview that went off the rails. And the think pieces poured in. Columnists questioned the ethics of ambushing a guest with personal attacks. Media critics dissected the responsibility of talk shows to balance entertainment with professionalism. Even psychologists chimed in, analyzing Joy's behavior, suggesting that what viewers witnessed was less a debate and more a very public unraveling. Meanwhile, Angelina emerged from the wreckage untarnished, perhaps even elevated. Clips of her calm, measured responses went viral. "This is bullying," she had said, and those 3 words became a rallying cry. Fans and supporters flooded social media, praising her composure, her strength, her ability to stand firm in the face of hostility. But Joy? The fallout was swift and merciless. The network issued a carefully worded statement the next morning. They expressed regret over the incident, apologized to Angelina Jolie and viewers, and promised an internal review of on-air conduct. It didn't mention Joy by name, but everyone knew. Sponsors weren't happy. A handful quietly pulled advertisements slated for upcoming episodes. Audience members demanded refunds for tickets to future tapings. Online petitions circulated calling for Joy's suspension or her outright firing. And then, for several days, Joy disappeared. No appearances. No statements. No social media posts. Just silence. Which, of course, only fueled speculation. Was she suspended? Was she hiding? Was she preparing a lawsuit? Rumors swirled, and with every hour she remained silent, the narrative slipped further out of her control. Angelina, on the other hand, didn't have to say a word. Her actions during the interview had already spoken volumes. Instead, she went back to her work, meeting with humanitarian organizations, visiting refugee families, quietly continuing the very efforts Joy had mocked. And in doing so, she reminded the public that her identity was bigger than any talk show clash. Now pause here for a moment and think about the contrast. One woman imploded in real time, her anger consuming her. The other held steady, her composure transforming chaos into dignity. Which one do you think history remembered? By the end of the week, Joy finally broke her silence. She issued a statement, part apology, part defiance. She admitted her comments were overly harsh but doubled down on her right to ask tough questions. The public reaction? Mixed at best. To many, it sounded less like accountability and more like damage control. The show returned to its routine, but things were never quite the same. Whenever Joy spoke on controversial topics afterward, the audience watched her more closely, waiting for a repeat. Her credibility had taken a hit. The meltdown had become her shadow. Angelina, meanwhile, rarely mentioned it again. In interviews, when asked about that moment on The View, she'd offer a small smile and shift the conversation back to humanitarian issues. It was as if she knew the best way to win wasn't to dwell on it, but to move beyond it. And that's the real lesson here. Because this story isn't just about 2 women clashing on television. It's about what happens when public personas collide with private insecurities. It's about how live television amplifies human flaws and magnifies moments of weakness. And most importantly, it's about the power of composure. Ask yourself, how many people would have reacted differently in Angelina's place? How many would have lashed out, shouted back, or stormed off set? How many would have crumbled under the weight of those accusations? But she didn't. She stayed calm. She stayed grounded. And that composure transformed the entire narrative. And what about Joy? Her meltdown became a cautionary tale, not just about anger, but about the risks of chasing confrontation for entertainment. Viewers tune in for drama, yes, but they also crave authenticity. And when drama tips into cruelty, the audience turns. They always turn. Even now, years later, the incident is remembered. Clips resurface online, especially whenever Joy Behar trends for a controversial remark. The video of Angelina Jolie sitting calmly, dismantling accusations without raising her voice, remains a masterclass in public grace under pressure. So in the end, the story wasn't just about one disastrous interview. It was about the collision of ego and empathy, the unraveling of one figure and the steady rise of another. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to chaos is calm. And maybe that's the takeaway for all of us. Because we've all faced situations where someone tried to tear us down, where emotions ran high, where the easiest thing would have been to fight fire with fire. But what if, like Angelina, we stayed composed? What if we chose dignity over rage? What if, instead of breaking down, we let the other person reveal themselves? Because when the storm passes, and it always does, the world doesn't remember the noise. It remembers the calm that stood against it. And that's why this story, this meltdown, this unforgettable clash on live television still matters. Not because of the gossip, not because of the spectacle, but because it showed us the difference between losing control and choosing to hold it. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you find yourself in a confrontation, big or small, public or private, remember that studio. Remember the chaos, the shouting, the meltdown. And then remember the woman who stayed calm, who didn't take the bait, who turned an ambush into a moment of strength. Because in the end, that's the real power. Not the noise, not the chaos, but the composure that outlasts it all.